Hey everybody, it's Chris. Got another interview for you today with Dr. Tom Lodi. Dr. Lodi is a legend in integrative oncology. I've known about him for a long time. We first met in 2012 at a little event called Alive New York. And I've been a fan of him and his work for a long time. And he's brilliant. He has so much wisdom and experience working with patients, and he understands nutrition and alternative and therapies and integrative oncology. And he's got a lot of good stuff to share. I'm excited to hear it. And but I'll give him a quick intro. He started out as a conventional medical doctor and eventually left conventional medicine to pursue integrative, alternative, natural, non-toxic therapies and help patients get well that way. So we're going to dig into that too. But that's the brief intro. Dr. Thomas Lodi, thanks for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Long
So,
time, right? It's
huh?
been what, 10 years?
10 years. It's been 10 years since we were in the same room. Glad you're still alive and doing well.
Yeah, you
Um,
too.
so I would love for you to share your story, because I know you started out in psychology. That was sort of your first passion, and then moved into conventional medicine and worked in that field. But can you talk a little bit about how your origin story?
Yeah, so actually when I was like in the at UCLA in college, just following the rules, and I was reading a lot about spirituality, and I concluded that, well, there's no role in the Western world that I really want to move into. There's nothing that I don't want to be a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant. I don't want to do any of those things. So my path was more spiritual. So I bought a one-way ticket. I dropped out, bought a one-way ticket to India, and I lived there a couple of years. And then I realized that wasn't for me, and I returned. And when I got back to the U.S., I was looking for some work I could do that would be similar to that, because that was where my real passion was, and that was why I chose psychology, because psychology, you can look at those sorts of issues that you might in on an ashram and all that. So yeah, so I went to graduate school, practiced for a while, and what I kept finding was holes in my knowledge. I would be working with somebody or a group, a family, and I'd find out, and I'd realize that because I did not understand the what was going on with them within their bodies, what is called pathology. I didn't understand the pathology. I didn't understand if they were on medications and all that, how it would affect their mind and their relationships and all that. So I got to a point where I realized I just can't go on until I get that other piece. So I went to medical school, not to be a doctor, but I went to medical school to round out my understanding of the human condition so that I could work with people more effectively. And that's kind of my path into the medical world. And then I graduate. I went down, did my residency, and practiced as a conventional doc. I kind of got sucked up into the whole thing, and I did that for about 10 years, and I kept saying it just doesn't work. We're not helping. And that's when I went off and studied on my own. I mean, studied with masters that I would meet in Japan, throughout the US, Europe, and Mexico. And then I finally came back to New York and settled down and started integrative oncology.
Now, when you said it wasn't working, what do you mean?
Well, I saw that if someone came in with a condition such as diabetes, 5 years later, they still had the diabetes. And now we were dealing with the side effects of the medications. Same with high blood pressure or any condition. We weren't doing anything with it. It wasn't being resolved. The only place we had successes was in the emergency room and in the intensive care units, right? Because there we do something, we either do or die, and that's it. So you either fix it or you can't. So there's a place for it, which is why we have to practice. I think the best way to practice is integrative, because it's not that allopathy is all wrong, but it's fantastic in many ways, and I use it. But it doesn't have all the answers. For chronic conditions, it has zero answers. But you broke your leg, the baby's coming out feet first, anything like that, that's where you want the allopath to come in and save the day. So
It's a great point, and I think a lot of people lump a sort of acute disease and chronic disease together in their mind. and they think, well, the doctors are so great at saving lives if you get shot or stabbed or you're in a terrible car wreck, that they also would be great at helping me deal with my chronic pain or diabetes or high blood pressure or even cancer, right? And there is a big distinction between the progress that's been made in those two types of diseases, chronic versus infectious or acute injury type situations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So 10 years, but you were in there working in hospitals for 10 years. I'm sure you saw everything under the sun during that time. And
Yeah.
to me, I mean, you're a unique person. We're all unique, but you're unique because most doctors don't leave conventional medicine. They just kind of stay there. They just stick it out and just keep doing that. What, why did you leave? What was different about you? Was it your background in psychology? What was it?
Well, when I when I saw that we were just, I mean, there's many, many examples, but when I saw that what we were doing wasn't working, and in fact, many times we were making it worse. In fact, almost all the time we were making it worse. And I also realized that we never studied health. There wasn't one course there. I mean, yeah, we got a half a unit in medical school on nutrition, which was not real nutrition, but at least we got a half a unit on it. On health, we had zero. So I realized that we had no knowledge of health. All we had was we were really good at identifying what we call diseases, and I hope to explain a little bit later how the whole idea of a disease is a myth. So anyway, when I realized that we were in the wrong paradigm, and yeah, I just could no longer ethically practice that way. I had read a book, actually. It was called The Medical Miracle. It's about hydrogen peroxide. It's written by Dr. William Campbell Douglas Jr. And he talks about the work of Charles Farr, who was an MD, PhD in Oklahoma. In fact, after I closed my conventional practice, which was basically an urgent care center, because I could fix it. The first place I went was with Dr. Charles Farr and stayed with him, apprenticed with him for 3 or 4 months. But he showed that hydrogen peroxide was a fundamental, basic biochemical intermediate in metabolism that's happening every nanosecond in all of our cells, and we therefore have all these enzymes and all that sort of thing. And I realized when I read that book, I realized, wow, we're not even looking at real biochemistry or physiology or biology anymore. What we do is we just get a name, which they call a diagnosis, and then we look for drugs. We don't even look for, it's not even in our armamentarium to do that. So I realized that there was a big gap between what we learned in the first 2 years of medical school, which was the basic sciences, and then what we did on the wards in 3 and 4. It was as if you wind up on the wards in medical school in year 3, and they go, all right, now forget all that. This is what we do, right? It's like, what? And then, so I just found myself doing something, and I said, I'd rather be a farmer. If I can't do what I wanted to do, which was to help people heal, then I'm in the wrong place. So I was willing to lose it. You have to be willing to lose it. That's a good negotiator too, right? You got to be willing to walk away from the table. And I was willing to walk away from a license and whatever it was. I couldn't ethically poison people anymore.
Courageous for sure. And you really did step out and take a leap of faith, stepping out into the unknown. Because I know at that time was probably around the early 2000s, right? When, there was no such thing as integrative oncology really. And I mean, even talking about nutrition or natural therapies or natural approaches to healing, even today, you're considered a quack, right? So even back then it had to have been now people are more open to it, but 20 years ago, it was even more fringe. Like, my example in my own life, right? I was diagnosed in 2003, December 2003. So then in January 2004, I got a book about a guy who healed his colon cancer with raw food. And, I got so excited about this guy's story. And it's like, sometimes it's just one person can change your whole life, one person's story. For you, maybe it was that book. And so for me, it was this book and God's Way to Ultimate Health by George Malcolmus. So anyway, I
Yes.
yeah, George has
Oh
been around a
yes.
long time. So that was the first book of many, but I I had never met a single person on a raw food diet ever, right? And so the raw food diet at that time to me was a fringe diet for sick people and weirdos, right? Like it wasn't cool
Exactly.
or hip like it
I
is
know. No.
now. So it has come a long way, so that's good. All right, so you you opened a clinic in New York, right? An integrative clinic. That was the
Yeah.
first step for you.
Yeah. Actually, I came back and I worked for a while with Robert Atkins. I don't know the Dr. Atkins diet, right? And
Yep.
so I worked because I know he even though we agreed fundamentally on what human beings are, he had some great knowledge and protocols. So I worked there for a while, but I was a closet vegetarian because if he found out you were vegetarian, you'd be fired. So
Wow.
and then I went to work for another doctor named Pavel Yusuf, who was a Russian doctor, also brilliant. And then I felt like I had enough because I had all my learning had been uh, basically informal, and this was more formal because it was in a clinic setting, et cetera. So then I opened my own clinic in Glen Cove, New York, and I was the nurse and the doctor and everything. I did it all. So so it started.
And that didn't last too long in New York, though, right?
Yeah, the doctors, conventional doctors would complain because basically I think that they were seeing that people were coming to me instead of going to them. So it was, I think they were losing business. And I think one of the surgeons in the hospital, I remember, complained to the medical board, and they said he's killing people. Something really broad like that, with no proof. They didn't need proof, so they came into my clinic. They grabbed all my charts, and I went through this whole thing. And then I got questioned by the board for a couple hours, and in the end, they go, "Well, do you have any references for what you're talking about?" And about a week later, I sent it to them, and they go, "Okay, all right, you're fine, no problem." But anyway, I had to do that several times, and giving intravenous vitamin C, giving all the different things. Like in those days, telling people to fast, you could lose your license. Now, suddenly, because of Professor Longo's work at USC, suddenly everybody's an expert. I saw the other day a book of fasting by some urologist, who probably never fasted until like maybe recently for a few days. And I've been fasting and leading fasts for over 40 years. It's a fundamental way to heal, and it's fundamental to humankind. I mean, go back to Moses. He did 40 days, came down, got angry, went up, and did another 40 days. Uh,
Yeah.
Jesus did 40 days. I mean,
Yes.
it's pretty much, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I've got a book here that I think you'll appreciate. Here it is.
Oh, I love him. Herbert Shelton.
Herbert Shelton, Fasting Can Save Your Life. And I mean, this is from my mom had this huge collection of health and wellness books that was just a miracle for me. But yeah, this was published first published in 64, and this is a 1975 edition. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, he's my hero. I mean, that's who I grew up on, was Shelton.
Well, okay, so eventually you just got tired of dealing with New York folks, and you relocated to Mesa, Arizona, and opened an oasis for healing, which is I think what most folks know you from, right? Is because of that
Sure.
clinic, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Still
There's
going.
a still going. Yeah, it's been 17, 18 years now. So, yeah, and I'm here. I'm back in Oasis. But yeah, but in New York, in those days, I was like the only um, doctor who understood raw diets. So I had kind of the whole raw community. And in those days, New York, it was starting to grow. There was a whole, David Wolf was there in those days, and it was kind of like the Renaissance or something. It was a lot of really cool people. So I was their doctor. I remember when Sharma and what's his name were opening up Pure Food and Wine,
Oh
which
yeah,
was
that
right, that it turned into a fiasco. But when it first opened, it was amazing. So I
it
was
was
kind of their
amazing. I ate there
doctor.
several times. It was amazing. And now there's a documentary called Bad Vegan about how it went south.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it had nothing to do with the food. That's the
No,
thing.
it
It had
wasn't the
nothing.
food. Food was amazing.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
So Yeah, so those were the days. So that I still get contacts from people in New York who knew me in those days, right? So
All right,
most
so
of it.
I'd love for you to talk just about, your philosophies on health and healing and cancer. For the average person that, either they're about half my audience, are cancer patients. The other half are people who are just really interested in prevention. They just don't want to get sick. They want to stay well. What do they need to know? What's the
Okay,
difference in what you believe now, what you know now versus what were told in med school?
as I alluded to before, in medical school, we study disease and we become experts in disease, and if and that's the paradigm. And the disease model is actually a derivative of the germ theory, and it's basically us against them. It's an old Western John Wayne type thing, right? And so the germs are bad. They're going to get into us and they're going to destroy us. So we have to kill them. We have to get rid of them. So it's a military approach. Then that morphed into disease, as if a disease was an entity. It was a thing. Like, for example, you have diabetes. Well, okay, where is it? What is it? Well, it's not a thing. What we need to understand is that if you're eating too much pasta, bread, potatoes, rice, and cakes even, you're going to have too much glucose in your interstitial fluid, and the wisdom of your body, which is of divine origin, the wisdom of your body will understands that the glucose will kill it, so it becomes insulin resistant. So that insulin resistance, you go to the doctor now, and he says you have a disease. We have to get rid of it. So they give you, pharmaceuticals and things like that. But the truth is, it's not an entity that got into you. You're not being possessed. You're not being taken over by something. What's happening is your body is adapting. It's an adaptive homeostatic corrective response, right? So what do you need to do? Just change the environment so that the body no longer needs to do that particular adaptation, right? So you stop eating the bread, pasta, then your insulin receptors upregulate, and you get back to being insulin sensitive, and you no longer have the criteria that necessary for it to be called diabetes. Same with high blood pressure and even cancer. In cancer, the thing that happens is that the 40 to 50% of the mitochondria in cells are disabled, destroyed, and the cell has to, as a default mode of energy production, has to start engaging in fermentation. So it starts to ferment to produce energy, which is much less efficient. So they need 19 times more glucose. So then they make all of these metabolic changes by turning on this gene and silencing this gene, and you have a different genetic expression. And I want to make something really clear here. So you have a different genetic expression. So now all the genes that are turned on are what we call oncogenes, or what oncology calls oncogenes, or cancer genes. But they're if you look at the purpose of each of these genes and the enzymes that they produce and the proteins they produce, you'll understand it's all in support of fermentation, to support a fermentative metabolism, right? And so what it needs to be really clear right here, what they teach in the hospitals and in medical schools is that cancer is a mutation. You get a genetic mutation, and therefore you now are going to have cancer. Now, a mutation is, if you've ever met someone with Down syndrome. Now, I don't care what you feed this Down syndrome. I don't care what you give him IV. It will not become non-Downs. It will not go away. But somebody with cancer, their P53 is, tumor suppressor gene is down. The P21, the P10, all of these are been silenced. You can turn them back on. You can turn them back on with indole-3 carbinol, which comes from broccoli and cruciferous vegetables. I mean, there's many ways of doing it. So it's not a mutation. We have to understand that, because if we think it's a mutation, we think, well, there's nothing we can do. It's done. It's a done. He's a mutant. Well, you're not. It's just they've been turned on and off, which is how biology works. Biology, see, the DNA needs to be understood as not being the boss, the headquarters. It's merely the parts department. The cell membrane that's in touch with the interstitial fluid is interpreting, making decisions, and sending signals, and then the DNA just follows it, because it doesn't have eyes, so it says, okay, we need this one, or we need that one, or turn this one off, right? And that's what it does. It's not that the DNA decides that, because it needs a helper protein to come in and decide where it's going to replicate. So it's not making decisions, and that's very important. So genes being turned on and off is part of biology. It happens when a woman's menstrual cycle every month. Genes get turned on and off, as she cycles. So it's just the way it works. So that's a very important thing to understand. But all what we call diseases are homeostatic corrective responses, adaptive responses. And therefore, they do not need to be eliminated because they're helping us. Like if I was walking with a cane and you wanted to help me, you wouldn't kick the cane away. You would teach me how to walk first, and then I wouldn't need the cane, right? So it's the same kind of thing. If you change the environment, we can take a type 2 diabetes, not type 1, but type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, even coronary artery disease. I've had people who are ready for bypass and have clean arteries. You can clean it up, or it can be cleaned up. You can't take credit for it. It can be cleaned up by changing lifestyle and certain other IVs, but just by so that's the big thing. And so my kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean it. I think the MD now stands for mythology doctor. So we're all really good at this myth called disease. So that's the difference. So now I understand a healing paradigm. So when someone comes into me with cancer, and I explain to them, my goal is not to help you get rid of the cancer. My goal is to help restore you to health. Because when you have health, you'll not only not have cancer, you won't have diabetes, you won't have high blood pressure, you won't have depression. Okay, so that's our goal, right? And it's more of a positive one. And also, it puts the power back to the person, because one thing that happens with cancer people is they feel disempowered. They feel like, because now you got to go to this, you got this appointment at 10 o'clock, you've lost control of your life, and now it's all back with you. And people need that. They need to feel they have some control.
Absolutely. This was huge for me, is this revelation that I didn't have to be a victim of cancer. And this is a message that I'm repeating, every time I open my mouth, pretty much, because cancer patients are led to believe and convinced in many cases that they are a victim of this disease, that it's bad genes, it's genetic, as you said, or it's bad luck. And if it's either one of those, it means that nothing they did contributed at all to their current life state, to their current condition. And if nothing they did contributed to their current state, then there's nothing they can do to help themselves. So your Down syndrome example is actually apropos for that, right? It's like the Down syndrome person can't fix their Down syndrome, right? That is genetic and it's permanent. But with cancer, and for folks that are new to sort of these ideas, Dr. Lodi's talking about epigenetics, which is that's the science of gene expression. So you have all these genes in your body, and they express at different times, and there's triggers that cause cancer-promoting genes to express, and there's other triggers that can cause cancer-protective genes to express and turn off the cancer-promoting genes. And diet and lifestyle are huge, right? They're big. And so, I absolutely love what you said, because it's so important that patients get their power back, that they realize your choices matter, you can change your life, and the changes that you make can have a massive impact on your health and survival. And what you're talking about really is just the most basic, fundamental principle of holistic health, which is addressing the whole body, healing the whole body, and letting disease resolve in that process, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. When you go to a conventional clinic or hospital, it's a treatment facility. You're going to go in, you're going to sit back and passively be treated. You're going to be fixed because you're broken. That's the underlying implicit understanding. And so you become, and that's what they call a patient and a doctor. What we have is a healing center. You come in, and we're going to be your guides and teachers on your journey back to health. So you're a student or a journeyer or whatever we want to call it. We're not going to fix you. Only you can do it. I can't walk for you, right? And so it's a completely different paradigm. So instead of being fixed, you're going to walk the path. And that's how I see cancer. I see cancer as a tap on the shoulder by God saying, the path you're on is a little bit shorter than you'd like. Why don't you make a right-hand turn here? And you make that right-hand turn, and you're going to have a long life. Not only that, look what happened with you. You fulfill a potential that you didn't know you would have. And you now become an inspiration for others and your loved ones, your family, and even others. So it's an anointing. I see it as not everybody gets chosen, but when you do get chosen, you either say, okay, I can't do it, and just go off the cliff, or you make a right turn and you find your new life. You find your potential.
I appreciate that a lot. I feel like we have a lot in common, but in a different way. I mean, you took a huge risk leaving conventional medicine, and I took a huge risk leaving conventional medicine, right? We both left. My risk was a little bit more life threatening, right? But yours was career, your career and everything you'd worked for, all the med school and the 10 years of practice, like that was a huge risk of starting over. And but then there's freedom when you step outside this sort of mainstream, you know, mainstream tunnel, I guess, right? You kind of dig out of the tunnel and realize, oh well, there's a whole world, on the outside, right, above ground that I didn't even know about because I was so focused on this like little tiny path. So what have you seen in all these years of practice of helping patients? I'd love for you to give a quick summary of the most effective therapeutics, right? That what's the nutrition and integrative therapies that you've seen that have stood the test of time? Because there's a lot of stuff that, it's kind of flash in the pan therapies, not only in conventional, but also in the alternative world. And so what do you feel the strongest about that you've seen really, help the most people?
Okay, well, actually, I'd have to kind of divide that into three areas because, and it's kind of the way it's the program that's been developed over the years. But the first part, and they're not sequential, they're just they're simultaneous. But the first part is we have to stop making cancer, because if we don't stop making, it doesn't matter how good anyone is at getting rid of it. So, and people can understand this. If you have a tumor on your colon, on your bladder, on your pancreas, and it doesn't grow and it doesn't spread, you'll live a normal life. So the real question when people come to me is not how do I get rid of this, but how do I stop making this?
Yeah.
And that if that's not addressed, then we failed, right? So so that's it, and that has to do with cleansing, with juicing, and then fasting, and then lymphatic therapies, colon hydrotherapy. We balance hormones. We bring everything back into balance, and we teach people to meditate. And meditation for anybody because I find that sometimes Muslims, Jews, and Christians have a hard time because they're afraid that they'll be praying to another God or something like Buddha or something like that. But meditation is not a prayer. It's learning to shut up. It's learning to turn the mind off to be at peace. So what I explain to people, like the Muslims, you're going to pray 5 times a day. Okay, sit back after and listen for 2 minutes. Listen for the answer. And to Christians, when you pray, that's beautiful. Now sit back and listen because he might be answering you. So anyway, and that's how I have to say it, but we have to learn that. And the reason we have to learn that is because the immune system is the shadow of the mind. If you're happy, you had great news, and we checked your gamma interferon, we checked your natural killer cell function, we checked your T cells, they're active. If you just got terrible news, or you're sad, or you're angry, and I check it, the opposite will be the case. So therefore, and here's the problem with our minds, 90% of our minds are subconscious. We don't know what our self-talk is. We only have access to 10% that bubbles up there. And so we don't know what we're telling ourselves, but we've learned from psychology that about 80% of human thinking is negative because we grow up with, you can't do that, you're going to fall. Remember the last time you tried that? No, that's what we grow up with, right? No, stop, don't. And so we have a lot of negativity. So we can pretty much be certain that some of our self-talk, subconscious self-talk, is negative, which is impacting the immune system. So since you can't control the content, you can't decide what to think. So all you can do is turn it off. That's it. So you have to develop that muscle. So I tell people, let's just try it for 2 minutes, 5 times a day, 6 times a day, and just simply close your eyes, sit back, sit straight, don't be tired, and listen to your breathing. Listen to your breath going in and out, and don't talk, don't think. Just listen. Just learn how to turn it off. And that's very important. So anyway, that's all stop making cancer. The second aspect is targeting and eliminating without harm. And this is what the therapies that I think you were referring to, vitamin C, intravenous curcumin, intravenous quercetin, artemisinin, there's a bunch of them, B17. So, and then if we have, let's say a tumor is potentially impacting a vital function, or it's causing excruciating pain that can't be managed, then we'll use IPT for a while with insulin potentiated low dose chemo. Just long enough to get things turned around.
And explain that for folks that don't know what IPT is.
Okay, so one of the ways in which cancer, when a cell has to chronically ferment, and I like to change the word cancer because the word cancer has too much PR behind it. You hear that word and you go, they just stole your future. But if we understand what it is, when the cell loses its ability to use oxygen to make energy, its mitochondria are gone, it goes into a default mode of energy production called fermentation. So now it changes all of its enzymes and proteins and genetic expression to support that. So that's what it's doing. So part of it is upregulating insulin receptors. So they have all these, why? Because insulin lets glucose in, and these fermenting cells need 19 times more glucose. So there's all kinds of things. And this enzyme is turned on, these are turned off. And anyway, that's what metabolic therapies are. Metabolic therapies exploit that understanding of cancer biology. So if you put cancer cells in a position where they don't have the enzymatic capability to manage it, but healthy cells do because it's normal, then they will die and the healthy cells won't. That's a metabolic as opposed to a cytotoxic therapy, right? And that's a lot of what we do. So what I've learned is you can't do 1, 2, or 3 things because cancer is extremely clever. Remember, it was born out of being an adaptive response. So cancer just walked out of Gold's Gym. You don't want to mess with it, okay? You give the strongest, the latest and greatest chemotherapy. Your hair falls out, your lunch comes out, your bone marrow gets suppressed. After 2 to 3 doses, the cancer cell says, wow, that was pretty good. Can I have some more? Right, so it adapts very easily, whereas we don't. So you don't want to go head to head with cancer. What you want to do is exhaust it. So by doing multiple metabolic therapies where you're just exhausting its resources, right? And there's everything I'm talking about is in peer-reviewed journals. It's in standard oncological literature. This is not just alternative thinking. And I have the references if anyone would ever like to hear about them. But so by exhausting it, wearing it out, you can win. You can't come head to head because it's pretty smart already. And then the only thing is the insulin potentiated therapy. So since cancer cells have all these extra insulin receptors, what you do is you have the person come in fasting, they haven't eaten, and then you give them a small amount of insulin, about the same amount they would produce during a normal meal. Okay, and now, since the cancer cells have the most receptors, they grab it first. And one of the things insulin does is it causes the cell membrane to be permeable, because you're eating. Okay, so now you've got a small window there where the cancer cells are permeable, the rest of the cells are not. So whatever you administer, it can be arsenic and mercury, it can be, lead, it's going to go sucked up into the part that's permeable and not the other. So you have a little window, it's called the therapeutic window. So you can give, and that's why clinical trials are all nonsense. I give the old-fashioned chemo, the original 4. I can do that. I'm going to get the same effect. Anyway, it goes into the door, and now you've hit the target, right? And which is what you want to do. So that's the purpose of insulin. It's a biological response modifier that allows you to hit the target. So anyway, that's the second part, is how do we get rid of, eliminate cancer without harm? And then finally, the third aspect of our program is waking up the immune system, because cancer cells are, as I said, very clever. They have enzymes, they have cytokines that actually turn off and inactivate the immune system. So you want to wake it up again, because I'll tell you, if you have an optimally functioning immune system, within 96 hours to 168 hours, doesn't matter how much cancer you had, it'll be gone. The immune system would do that. So 3 things: stop making cancer, target and eliminate without harm, and then immune system. So in answer to your question, in the middle part, I have basically, vitamin C is the king. It's the king in many, many ways. And then I'd have to say intravenous quercetin and curcumin are extremely healthy. Artemisinin is kind of hard because you get anemia. But anyway, I've tried poly-MVA. In other words, anything that I've ever run across, I would study it. If it looked safe and effective, I would try it. I would do it for 9 months. If I didn't see a significant change, I would get rid of it because it's already expensive enough. I mean, we can't keep that. So if it's not changing, let's not use it. So this is what I'm down to now. I'm down to a few therapies, but really it's the mind, lifestyle, and the immune system are really what we have to do. So I have ways of stimulating the immune system with IL-2, low dose IL-2, TA1, thymosin alpha-1, which is a peptide, which wakes up your T cells and natural killer cells. So there are ways of doing that. But anyways, I don't think I answered your question, but
You did. No, you did. It was great. And a lot of, you said a lot that I would like to touch on, but um, are there, any, if you're comfortable answering this question, are there other hip, popular alternative treatments that you have incorporated into your practice that really you didn't see any benefit from that you wouldn't mind mentioning? I know you mentioned poly-MVA, didn't see much there. Are there some others that you know?
yeah, there was one called what was it?
Silvestrol?
I guess it was Silvestrol. Is that the one? I'm mixing it up now, but whatever it was, if you used it, you couldn't use like so many other things, including vitamin C and things like that. So I just said, well, can't do that. Over the years, poly MVA. No, and I'll tell you something. I'm kind of, I've kept B17 on the list.
And that's been around a long time.
That's been around a long time, and I'm not sure why. I don't really know if it's doing much. I know it's not causing harm. That's, but I just haven't seen it because the problem with alternative integrative medicine is that we don't just do a double-blinded placebo-controlled studies where we just manipulate one variable and see how it works. We're doing, because with every patient, I want to do everything. I'm not going to experiment on anyone. So anything so I just give them everything. So I think had I added B17 in now, I could see whether or not it changes things. But it was part of my early regimen, so I don't really know what it's doing. So, but anyway, when people are running out of money and they need to like hone down their program, that's one of the things I'll say. Well, we don't need that anymore, so.
That's a good point you made too. It's, the pharmaceutical industry, they're testing one drug at a time. And in most cases, it's not even about, are we saving any lives? It's just, what is this drug doing to people, first of all? And second of all, like, okay, are we getting some benefit? Or is there some life extension? Is there some improvement in quality of life, which is such a nebulous metric anyway? And yeah, in the holistic world, it's like, no, we want to change everything about your life. Like it's impossible to do a placebo trial when you're changing a person's diet, when they're exercising, when you're giving them lots of supplementation and herbs and you're just, and helping them forgive, right? You're helping them remove stress from their life. And the thing that I'm asked about clinics often, what clinic should I go to? And the answer that I give, and I'm curious what you think about this answer, but the answer that I give as a patient advocate is look, don't expect a clinic to cure you. Healing happens at home, right? And you have to get your home life sorted out. You have to change your home life, your diet, the way you exercise, your relationships, right? You have to get that organized, and you got to get your house in order. Now, if you go to a clinic, you can get a tremendous benefit. You can get a jump start. You can get some therapeutics, right? You can feel better in a few weeks at a clinic. Like noticeably, people get out of wheelchairs, like their energy comes back, like great things happen. But if they get that benefit at a clinic with the intensive therapies, and they go back home to their just stress mess of a life, they typically regress. What are your thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And that's the whole concept of stop making cancer. So what I've learned over the years is that you can't just tell people, listen, you need to change your life, because they know that. They know that. For example, there's not a cigarette smoker alive that doesn't know they shouldn't smoke. There's not an obese person alive that doesn't know they need to stop eating or control their eating, et cetera, alcoholism and all that. So and most people get it, but actually with diet, there's a lot of really, when I see families taking their children to like KFC, or I'm like, you don't know. I mean, I'm shocked at this time that you really don't know, and I guess they don't. So there's a lot of uh, uh, ignorance out there, and I don't mean that um, in a derogatory manner, but it's just ignorance is that you don't know. They just don't know that this stuff is not healthy. But so what I've learned is three things have to happen to someone. They need to have their database changed. In other words, they need to do some learning. They need to understand, see the data, like understand that why plant food is our natural diet. They need to understand all that. Why cooked food is poison. How is it? You know, and I have lectures on that, and I show the actual chemical reactions, the Maillard chemicals that are produced during cooking, et cetera. So the second part of that is to get the training. So it's one thing to learn about it, but the training. So we have classes, daily classes, where they're learning. So by the end of their stay with us, they're actually coming in the mornings, making their own food for the day, right? And so because if they don't leave with the habit, they won't develop it. You know, they just won't. They just won't. And then the third thing they need, which is crucial, is the experience of feeling better. So that without that experience of feeling better, it'll just be theory, and theory doesn't take you very far. So, and that experience comes usually from we put people on either a 2-week or a 3-week juice cleanse. And I explain to them, you know, the first 3 days are the hardest because you're fighting this monster called appetite. But once that's gone, it becomes easy. You feel better. You have more energy. And it's necessary because here, think about it. You have some sick fish in your aquarium. You can put medicine in the aquarium all day, but if you don't change the water in the aquarium, the fish will continue to be sick. So that's, you know, part of what we do. And that's that experience that people say, oh, I get it. So now they have the experience and the knowledge and the training. They have more of a chance of a successful lifestyle because, like you pointed out, they're going to go back. Suppose they're from New York and they're in an Italian family and they go back and there's pasta and meatballs and, you know, and they're sitting around it. You know, it's kind of like if you're an alcoholic, you're not going to go meet your friends at the bar. You know, and so we have to give these, and that's why we have to work with the family. The other thing, when you said, you know, getting your house in order, like recently, I had a husband and a wife in front of me for, you know, as a potential, and the husband was against it. He didn't want this. He didn't want her to do that. He wanted her to go conventional. So I explained to them, until you guys can come to terms, this won't work, because whatever benefit you get when you get home at night, it's going to destroy it. So you know, it just won't work. So even getting things, your house in order really means also your relationships. So a lot of our relationships are toxic, and we have to acknowledge them. I mean, I had a woman who told her husband, I love you, but I need a year because I have to heal. She says, we'll meet at the end of the year. I don't want to contact you at all. And if everything's still good, we'll get back together. If not, and that's what she did. You know, I'm not recommending people do that. That was her decision that she did. But people have to understand, if you have, there are relationships that are, I mean, I had a poor woman from Mexico who I don't know if she was purchased by this guy or what, but she couldn't speak any English, and he treated her like a possession. And I had somebody who could speak to her in Spanish. We finally found out that really she was dying to get out of the relationship. That was her only way out of this relation. So that's how toxic relationships can be. But most of the time we don't realize it. It's subtle because it's your mom or your daughter, or, you know, and you don't realize it. But if you don't correct those things, then it's going to come right back. So yeah, it's really a time for introspection, healing. And one of the ways to come in touch with who you are and to understand who you are is to clean out your body. And as soon as you start getting healthy, you'll start to get a different kind of mind.
Yeah, you get that mental clarity for sure. And also, you know, what I found is when I first converted to a raw food diet, after I got over the hump, which was, you know, the first few days, a couple weeks in, you know, it's like it unlocked something in my spirit and in my mind, where I thought, wow, okay, I've got this. Now, what else can I do? Right? What's the next level for me? I've got the diet figured out, dialed in. I've radically changed my diet. What else do I need to change about my life? And that's when I started really looking inward, right? Like thinking about my thoughts, you know, and my emotions, and, you know, the people in my life and the way I was living. the way I was acting and reacting, right? And just started working on those things. And those things you can't change overnight. You can change your diet overnight. You can start juicing overnight. And that's the big jump start. But then, the other things, changing the way you think and act and react, that takes time. I'm still working on it. Things still piss me off. I still can be short-tempered about certain things, when they're not going the way I want them to go, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
how much, I would love to hear you talk about the difference between, and we're got a few minutes left on our interview, and I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time. I would love for you to talk about the difference between the patients that do really well and the patients that don't do well in terms of their attitude and their mindset and emotions and stress. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That's because that's critical. It's what I call faith. Now, we all know what faith is, but I want to help redefine it for people, or at least give the definition that I use. Faith is when you know what's going to happen before it happens. It's not believing. And in fact, you can only believe in something that's not true, like Santa Claus and tooth fairies, but you don't believe in mountains and you don't believe in oceans. You either know about them or not. So you grew up in the desert, your friend says, hey, do you believe in oceans? No, they say, do you know about oceans? Okay, so that which is true, that which is true, you know or you don't, and that which is not true, you believe or not. So if someone says you believe in God, I say no, I know about God, right? Because to me it's clear. I mean, it's not a belief, right?
Yes.
And when you say, think about it, when you say I believe you, you're also, what's implied is there's some doubt. Belief and doubt are in the same, they're cousins, So, but when you say I know what you're saying is true, it's a whole different story. So anyway, I'm gonna give you an example. I had a woman who had extremely advanced breast cancer with all throughout her bones and her lungs. She was brought into our clinic on a gurney. This was like 12, 15 years ago. On a gurney, and she had just come from her oncologist who told her she had 3 weeks to live, which is sorcery, by the way. You don't ever say such things. You cast a spell on someone. But anyway,
thank you for bringing that up. The medical hex, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's a spell, and that makes those guys in the white coats witches and warlocks. So I don't, and they're not. It's not they're innocent. They're not innocent. They know what they're doing because they don't want to know what we're doing. So anyway. But anyway, so she comes in, she's got this mindset. Now she had seen some of my videos. So when I walked up to her gurney, she grabbed my arm and she said, thank God, now I know I'm going to make it. Okay, 6 weeks later, she was jogging to the clinic. Her husband would drive behind her. 8 years later, I get a postcard from Paris. So she was on vacation. Okay, now why her, who had, quote, 3 weeks to live, and the lady down on the other room who wasn't as bad? And it all had to do with attitude. She said, I know it. There's another woman in 2000. This was when I was still in New York. 2001, June. She came in riddled with breast cancer again. So much so that she couldn't lift her arm because she had these matted lymph nodes. And so she came in already knowing she'd be dead in 3 months. So she said, can you just help me to get a little more mobility and all that? Anyway, I gave her a talk about healing and health and diet and all that stuff, that yoga, meditation, exercise, relationships, all that. And then I said all of our IVs. She goes, oh, I get it. I don't need the IVs. So she said, I don't want any IVs. I'm just going to do the lifestyle. And I said, okay, well, at least come by once a month and let me see how you're doing. So she would, and I would see as she came in every month, her arm was moving better. She did everything. Like she became like a disciple of this way of life. By December, she was, like 6 months later, she was moving around. Everything was back to normal. In January, she had a fatal automobile accident. And they did an autopsy. And when they did the autopsy, there was no cancer. So her husband and I, who had become close by that point, he was saying, we're devastated, but it's not as bad as if she hadn't gone this route, because these last 6 months she was living, not dying, and all of our relationships and with her children, were healed. And then we also realized one other thing. that the number of days is not up to us. It's the quality. It's what we're doing with it. So it was her time to go, and it wasn't cancer, but so it was a motor vehicle accident. But you know, it's in God's. God gives you the date of birth and the day of death, and that's just it. So it's what we do with it. So and that's a reminder to everyone too. When I'm sitting with a couple and one has cancer and one doesn't, we don't know who's going to die first. You know, none of us have a contract for tomorrow. We're here today by the grace of God. We'll be here tomorrow by the grace of God. So therefore, we all have the same prognosis. And that's something very, very important to keep in mind.
Yes, we're all going to die. And what are you going to do in the meantime? It's absolutely true. I love, there's a quote that I repeated many times. It's even in my books and stuff, but which is, I guess came from the Stupid Cancer organization called Stupid Cancer, which was get busy living, right? After your diagnosis, like, let's get busy living your life instead of focused on dying. And, you know, a practitioner asked me this question. This was a major light bulb moment for me. Is I was with a practitioner, and this woman said, do you want to live? And no one had asked me if I wanted to live. And I had never thought about it. And it was a really scary question, right? I had that sort of gulp, you know, like kind of the cold sweat, fear washed over me in that moment when she asked me that, because I also instantly realized, like, maybe I don't, right? Maybe I am living out, manifesting a death wish, right? Because I hate myself, because I'm so insecure, and because I'm full of just negativity. But in all of that was happening in the same moment, right? These sort of like, it's like fireworks of revelation. But I also realized that, you know what, I have a choice and I can choose. And so I said, yes, right? Yes, I want to live. Even though maybe up until that moment, I really secretly, subconsciously was sabotaging my health and my life, right? At that moment, I realized I can consciously choose to live. And that was huge for me.
No, and you know that, and that's a question I ask almost every potential patient, student, is do you want to live? You know, and have you thought about it? And the other thing that happens with cancer and all other illnesses is something called secondary gain. Sometimes people are getting more attention, or, you know, I've known people that don't want to really get better because before they were overlooked, or whatever the reason was. Or I had a mother, and she's always done things for the family, and now they're all doing things for her. So she was getting a lot of secondary gain. So you have to kind of sort that out. Is there any secondary gain you're getting? And do you really want to live? So, you know, someone will contact me and say, oh, my father's in the hospital, he's really sick. And my question is, does he know about what I do? Would he want to do it? Because you can't drag him here, right? So yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's definitely a real phenomenon that I talk about as well. And yeah, sometimes people have had a really rough life, and when they get cancer, all of a sudden they start getting a lot of love and support that they have not had, you know, and they really they cherish it, they love it. You know, it's like it's so meaningful to them to have people care for them, that they become attached to sickness, right? It's like they don't really want to get well because people are so kind to them because they're sick, you know? And so that is something that the patient has to sort of, you know, you got to get some self-awareness and realize, am I doing this? And, you know, like, what do I really want? And if someone wants to die, it's okay too, right? It's like, hey, if you're ready to die, like, I'm not going to twist your arm to keep you alive.
Right. And we have to honor death and understand, you know, just as we were born, we're going to die. And really, if you're ready, then let's stop all of this and just be with your family or your loved ones, and let's have a nice, beautiful transition. You know, do your prayers or whatever your belief system is, and get ready for it and honor it, instead of always, you know, to die in a hospital swallowed up by machines. You know, that's really, you know, that's not the way to go. You know.
It reminds me of one of my favorite anecdotes is a woman named Norma Bauerschmidt, who I talk about in my first book, but she was diagnosed with cancer. I think she was in her 80s and, refused all treatment and went on a road trip with her son and the dog for the better part of a year. And they traveled across the whole US in an RV and they documented it and took all these pictures. And she did all this stuff she'd never done before and saw all these sites she'd never seen. And it was the website was called Driving Miss Norma. I'm sure it's still up. And it's
Mhm.
just a beautiful story. And then, toward the end of that, she started to feel bad and went into hospice for a week or two, and then she passed away. And it was like she went out on her own terms. She chose to live and die on her own terms. And it's like that's such an important example because for some people, like, yeah, that you don't have to just be treated to death, right?
Right.
You can
Yeah.
choose your own adventure, right? If
Yeah.
if you're ready to die, like great, just savor every little bit of life that you have until that moment comes.
Yeah. And likewise, if you're ready to live, if it's your time, if you're not ready to die, then my job is not coming up with protocols. I could develop a software program that would do it, would never forget anything, would do it perfectly. My role is to teach and inspire. So and what if once you know that this body is a self-healing body, it's like a self-cleaning oven. Well, this is self-cleaning. You cut it, it heals. You scratch a Mercedes, it's not going to heal. Okay, so this is self-healing. So you will heal. So when I and we're just think about it, we're making 37 million new cells every second. That's pretty dynamic. Okay. So when you understand that what you were last year and what you are today are completely different. So if you had a condition last year, you don't have to have it this year. And therefore by understanding that, it's empowering. And if you want to live, if you know this stuff, what I just said, and you understand it thoroughly, then you'll know you're going to make it. And as soon as you know you're going to make it, you'll make it. It was like the story of the woman who touched Jesus' robe. And he turned to her and he said, "It's not me. It's your faith that healed you." And
Yes,
that's the faith I'm talking about.
it's huge. And I love that. I tell that story often. It's also in my book. Yeah, I love it. Well, Dr. Lodi, I just thank you so much. From the most deepest place in my heart, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I know, the root word of doctor, the origin of the word doctor is teacher, right? And that is what you are. You are truly a doctor, truly a teacher, teaching your patients your how to get well, how to heal, how to take care of themselves. And like that's what I'm trying to do, not as a doctor, but as a patient advocate and survivor, right? I'm just trying to teach and share and inspire and encourage people and empower them. So it's just yeah, this has been really awesome. And I'll say one other thing. You've challenged me in the difference between believing and knowing, right? You've
Mm,
challenged me because I often use the word belief, right? And I often say um, that you have to believe you can get well, and you have to believe that healing is possible. These are what I feel like are the fundamental sort of core first step in the process. Like this is what I say all the time. You have to believe that you can get well. You have to believe that healing is possible. But and the reason I do all these interviews with you and with other doctors and other survivors is to create that belief. But now that, after hearing you talk about the difference between believing and knowing, I may have to revisit the way I talk about this, right?
yeah, because I really, if you think about it for a while, you'll see that wherever there's belief, there's doubt, because they
Yep.
imply each other,
Yep.
right? You still don't believe me. Which means you doubt me. You doubt me, and not believing is the same thing. So they're really the same thing. So you want to know, and so I think it's a very important distinction. Um,
Yeah. And maybe there's a sort of a transitory thing there because, you know,
mm,
between a person has no belief, right? They don't even know they can get well. And the person that's convinced and they know they can get well, maybe belief is kind of in the middle, right? They start to like, I'm encouraging people to start believing, right? And with the hopes that they come to a point where they just know, right?
yeah, exactly. So you know that before it now becomes possible, and that would be
Yeah.
belief. So, but the bridge between fear, which is unknowing, and faith, which is healing, is knowledge. So that's really, teaching. And if you understand this incredible divine machine that we have, it heals. And I've seen people like that woman I was telling you about for 6 months. She did nothing else but that. And they did an autopsy and there was no cancer. I mean, you can't ask for a better scientific experiment. I mean, there was just none in there. So, and that was it, because she knew it. And so did the other lady. They knew it. So that's the power of knowing. But you only can know if you have the information. If you think that your condition is genetic or bad luck, like you said, then you got to go to these guys because they're going to help you. But if you realize that your situation is temporary and only you can change it, then you will change it. And people like you who I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and it happens. Yeah. Yeah.
As you were talking, I was just thinking, yeah, you've got to increase your knowledge until you know. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so energized by our conversation. This has been such a thrill. And folks, if you've been watching, if you've made it this far in the interview, I'm sure you are too. I'm sure you're feeling this incredible, just spark of energy and hope from Dr. Lodi. And please share this video with people you care about. Help us reach more people with this message, the message of hope that you can heal, that the body was created to heal. And thanks again for watching, Dr. Lodi. I thank you for your time. Hey, everybody, we'll see you on the next one.